I think they're hungry too old.
Testing, testing. Yep, I hear you. Okay. Testing, testing. All right.
Hey, Jeff, do you want to test her? I think I have it on.
Put it on.
Oh, now it went through. Whoop, whoop.
You're loud now.
Use my inside voice.
Yeah, I'll give it to you. Okay. Okay, and then if, I don't know how you want to do it, if you want to entertain questions throughout, or if you want to save some questions for the end or whatever,
You know,
because we have to run around and have them speak their questions into the microphone.
Okay.
So anybody online,
what is more convenient for you?
nothing,
Okay.
except I'm going to give, John, are you going to be speaking?
I think I might.
Would you like to introduce these lovely people?
Sure.
All right, good. I would love that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't matter to me.
I'll give you the microphone, and then how about if there are any questions, you'll use this. It's wireless, but it'll be on, and when you get ready to speak, just turn this on. Testing. Testing, testing. Okay, and then if anybody has a question from here, then we just need to make sure that that they ask the question.
Do you prefer they wait till the end with questions?
Probably wait till the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
People get upset with us if they can't hear the questions. What's that? That's why we're trying to make everybody happy.
Yeah.
And we don't have that many people to watch it. Sometimes in the middle of the week, they'll come back and they'll put these classes up again because they're put on our website. And so they'll do it later in the week,
So
not necessarily.
you can just explain, they can ask questions at the end of your presentation, before mine then, so.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Is it?
Shoot, did I turn my phone
Oh,
off?
for 4 minutes past.
Okay. Hello, welcome to the education portion of today's presentation. My name's John Baxter. I'm a member of Empire Mental Health Support, and two of the main members of the organization are here, Phyllis Ahrens and Jerry Ziegler. And I run a support group once a week for the organization here at the church. It's Mondays at 2:30. It can last anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. I'm going to try and keep this brief, and I'm going to let Phyllis Ahrens start.
Actually, Jerry's starting. Oh, that's right, but you got your.
Yeah, I'm mic'd up. All right. Well, I didn't think I was going to go first, but all right. I don't have anything prepared. I am the president and co-founder of Empire Mental Health Support. And the reason I am is because we used to have NAMI Sioux Falls and had like 3 groups a week and at least, and then it kind of dissolved. And because of COVID, we decided to try to start from scratch and do a new presentation, and it seems to be pretty successful. We're up to 3 meetings a week again, plus we have a family support group. My story is that I grew up in Watertown and graduated from there in 1986, and from there I went to the Navy for a year and a half. I get discharged early due to military sexual trauma, and out of that I got post-traumatic stress disorder. It was a long climb of about 20 years to try to get disability from the Veterans Administration and get Social Security so that I could at least live comfortably in the sense that I wouldn't have to be forced to work and have anxiety attacks and things like that. I also had an anxiety disorder from childhood, although it was never diagnosed that way. You know, back in the 70s and 80s, kids were either disruptive in class or fidgety. They never had like an actual diagnosis. There was just something wrong with the kid, you know? And so I didn't do too bad in school, but I didn't do too well either. So it was hard for me to get in front of people and do things like this back then, even though I took speech three times in high school. So I kind of liked it. I wanted to be a comedian as an adult, and you know, you kind of have to speak to people in order to do that, but I always had to read off my cards and stuff instead of look at people, so it was kind of hard. What we're trying to do with Empire Mental Health Support is get back what we lost from NAMI Sioux Falls and, you know, make it better, make it our own. Be there for people that are in mental health court. Be there as an advocate in peer during the legislative session. Fight for equal rights for all, you know, because sometimes even today mental illness is judged against when it comes to like jobs, careers, you know, other things. If you've been hospitalized, you know, and you're a hunter, you know, you can't like really go get a gun and, you know, be able to hunt with others. But we're working on that too. And thanks to the voters, we did get the Medicare expansion this month, and I'm happy about that because like the people that I know in the community with mental illness, it is hard to get medical attention to begin with. And some people who do work can't get the time off to go see a therapist or get medication and things like that. And oftentimes, if they do work full-time, they're paying a lot for insurance, and it was supposed to be affordable. So hopefully this Medicare expansion will bring the prices down a bit, as well as give those who are just on disability to get their medical care right away instead of waiting the 2-year period that people have to wait to get it. So other than that, we hope to, you know, grow exponentially. My main goal is to have a meeting in the 10 largest cities in the state, and the original idea for Empire was to actually have an empire of, you know, surrounding states having meetings too for mental illness. But hopefully that'll happen someday. Right now, I'd just like to have the 10 biggest cities have a meeting at least. And that way we could have more outreach. I'm also a trainer of group leaders for the support groups and the family support groups. And that just entails meeting with me like a couple hours, going through our materials that we did, and then you get a certificate at the end that says that you can lead meetings, which is great. I've probably trained about 10 people so far in the past couple years. I would be interested in starting another group training next year, early next year. You know, wait after the holidays so that nobody's like hustling and bustling and stuff like that. So if you're interested, call Phyllis on her number or send us an email through Empire MHS, sorry, at outlook.com. Other than that, we also have a website, and we'll probably be switching to that once we get to our marketing and branding portion. But it's through WordPress, and I basically built it myself. And I try to change things every so often. Sometimes I forget. I'm working on instruction videos on YouTube as well. I call it the sound mind, and I try to keep a positive attitude towards it and just let people know what other therapies there are and what they can find within themselves and the good, so that they too can have a sound mind. And with that, I'll take some questions if you have any, and go from there.
I have a question. I was
Yes.
wondering how long has this Empire Health been, or mental health been going now?
Just over
Maybe you
2
said
years.
It. 2 years.
Yep.
Just coming off the
Yeah.
pandemic. Any other questions?
Are you in need of other meeting groups or other places to be?
Yes.
Because I think we would love to have you.
Thanks. Yeah, he,
One already, okay. I missed that, sorry, John.
And another
yeah,
question.
over there.
I'm curious, how are you supported financially? How does that work? And the second question is, I think we're all concerned about people who aren't stable. Now, I'm talking stable, not mentally ill in different categories, but who aren't stable getting guns. So how do we differ on those who maybe have a history or are on medication for mental illness who would be safe, and those who have a history of that who wouldn't be safe?
I think I'll have Phyllis address that.
Am I on?
Yep.
I will say on the gun issue, I am a networker. I have my fingers in a lot of different places, and one of the organizations I belong to is called Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. And that's one of the issues we address is, how do you determine who is safe to have a gun? Because I will just say, I have been an advocate for people with serious mental illness for decades. And I know many people with serious mental illness who are very safe, who would, be able to have a gun very safely. But a history of violence. People, who grew up as kids, maybe torturing animals or doing other things. People who are domestic abusers, have a history of violence. Those are individuals who probably should not have a gun. But, one of the things that Moms Demand Action does, and I'm gonna, we're here in Empire Mental Health, but they have a program called Be Smart, which educates adults about safe storage of guns, so that kids don't get hold of them, and so that if you have a family member who probably shouldn't, how to keep it locked up and safely stored, because guns are everywhere, and people want to get their hands on them. I'll talk a little bit too about some of the advocacy we're doing, but there are red flags for people who should not have a gun, but having a serious mental illness is not one of those red flags. Because people with serious mental illness are much more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of violence. Rain on your parade.
That's okay. I personally don't own one. I just don't feel the need for any. I would have probably in the past turned it on myself anyways,
Yeah.
if I had one. So.
Any other questions? Oh, the question, how are you funded? Where do you get your
yes,
funding?
we get donations from nice men and women, and we also get like donations from pharma and things like that, and grants, and we do have members that pay dues every year. So it comes from a lot of sources.
People who just love us.
Sorry with all the questions, but another one I have is, do you have professional people on your board or people who help you with these support groups, or is it just, I shouldn't say just, probably the most important thing are you yourselves, but is there some professional guidance along the way for what you're trying to do?
Not at this time, but when we first designed this program, we would have liked to have a couple of professionals on the board just to give us the heads up about new medications, new therapies, that type of thing. But as of yet, we don't have any professionals helping us with the meetings or with the board at this time.
Our bylaws specifically state that the vast majority of our board members have to have someone in their family with a mental illness, or they have to live with a mental illness themselves, so that we don't lose sight of who we are reaching. My goal is that we know there are many professionals out there whose lives are touched by mental illness, and they will come out of the closet and join us.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I came in a little bit late, so you may have covered this, but how is a mental illness properly defined? Are there certain illnesses that are classified mental illnesses, or how? I personally take medication for anxiety, depression. Is that considered mental illness?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so, and yeah. How is it generally defined?
There's a great big book about this called the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, and and it tells you what criteria have to be met to receive a certain diagnosis. Mm-hmm. But pretty much if it affects the brain, it's going to be a mental illness.
Yep.
And it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a medical problem like any other.
I was going to ask you just kind of a ballpark figure. What percentage of people are quietly carrying around a diagnosis, or they suspect they themselves or somebody in their family has it, but it's never been addressed medically, by a professional? I mean, I think there's probably a lot more families impacted, but it's really quiet, and so people don't. Do you have an idea?
I have seen that statistic, and don't quote me because it's in one of those back of your mind things, but it's like, particularly for children, like maybe at least 50% of kids who have an illness, are not diagnosed. And adults, I think it's pretty similar, that a lot of people are struggling in silence because of the stigma and the embarrassment of saying, me too. When, treatment works if you get it.
Sometimes it's nature versus nurture. The way people can be raised, they look at mental illness as a weakness. And so when that child becomes an adult, they're like, well, I don't want to ask for help. And then there's, like I alluded to before, about the affordability of getting therapy and medication. For some people, it's just impossible. And so they find other ways to medicate themselves, like street drugs, alcohol, that kind of thing, just to feel good about themselves for a little while. And so a lot of people have co-occurring disorders, which is an addiction plus a mental illness. And there's groups for that too, but like some of them just don't understand about mental illness, and they only focus on the addiction. I tended to be one of those co-occurring where I would drink to numb the pain of what I was going through, but then I would be responsible too and have a job and stuff in the beginning, so that I would kind of hide it and not tell people what I went through, kind of thing. So they didn't have to know, I thought.
Do these groups also, like Al-Anon with AA, is there a thing for families?
Yes.
Okay, so there's one for families.
Yep. Well, if there's nothing else, I'll have Phyllis take over.
Put my clock here so I... Okay, I'm Phyllis Ahrens. Told a little bit about myself, but I grew up in a family where, again, long time ago, people didn't talk about mental illness. I have a storied life. Most of my life was, I worked in long-term care, but God opens doors, closes windows, etc. And I, in 1994, started working at Fifth Street Connection, the mental health center downtown that helps people who have serious mental illness manage their lives, and live in the community. That's when I decided I needed to do something. I got nominated to the NAMI Board of Directors. I ended up being the state executive director for 8 years, retired from that, moved to the Sioux Falls organization and was their executive director for about 4 or 5 years and retired from that. And then NAMI Sioux Falls got dissolved. Nobody ever told us why, but it's like, well, there's a hole that needs to be filled. And so a bunch of us former members got together and said, let's do something. And so never started a business in my whole life, but I had 3 brain cells that still worked. And so we got together in June of 2020, we became incorporated in South Dakota. But, when I worked at Fifth Street, I started to realize I've lived with mental illness my whole life. My mother, everyone knew she was a difficult person, but she had a personality disorder. She didn't talk to me for 10 years because she asked me my opinion on something once and it didn't agree with hers, and so she just But working at Fifth Street, I learned how to work with people like that, and I ended up going from worst to first. She ended up, loving the dickens out of me. But I saw a population who didn't realize that they are important parts of the community. That, oh, I live on disability, and oh, I live in subsidized housing, and so, I just have to take whatever people throw my way, and it's like, no. I am a lot about empowerment and helping people find their voice. And I will say through the organizations, the growth, John is one of my shining examples. John was kind of a really quiet guy when we got to know each other, I don't know how many years ago, 15 or so. You work with him a little bit, started coming to groups, and then it's like, well, John, I think you could lead a group, and found the confidence for that. John, you've got some real qualities. He became a state trainer. So people have potential, and that's that's a lot of what I want to do, is help people realize their potential. And, you know, having a serious mental illness doesn't have to stop you from achieving the goals that you want. And I wanted to, we got going because we needed to fill the gap. And a lot of our importance is the support. We know from AA, from Al-Anon, the importance of being able to talk with people who truly know what you're going through and what you're talking about. And so that's why, you know, I don't go to Jerry or John's group, because I'm fortunate enough not to, you know, have a diagnosable mental illness. I'm not sure that people wouldn't say I do, but anyway, so I don't know the people that go there, because it's for that community. You know, people have said, well, you know, shouldn't you have like a therapist? No, these are not therapy groups. They are friends getting together, helping friends, you know, learning from each other. And I'll say, in all of our groups, most people have been through therapy at some point in time, but we're not therapy. We are mutual support. You know, the family group meets 6:30 Sunday evenings. We are fortunate enough to have people who've been generous to us, so we have an office down on 10th and Prairie, and that's where Jerry's groups meet, and our family group, and John's meets here on Monday afternoons. But, you know, our goal would be to have groups spread throughout the community, different times of the day, different days of the week, you know, because not everybody's schedule allows for that. So that mutual support is like one of the main parts of our organization. And then public education, going out and helping people understand that no one asks to have a mental illness. You know, I tell people I've never met one person, you know, at 5th Street or wherever, who said, you know, my whole life's aspiration was to grow up and live with a serious mental illness, you know, and not be able to work. No one asks for that. You know, that is not, you know, if people had a choice, that's not what they would choose. So public education, helping people understand that, you know, a mental illness doesn't define who you are. It's a part of your person, but it's not you. You are much bigger than that. So a lot of public education so that people understand. And then the advocacy, and, you know, working at 5th Street has probably raised the advocacy part of me more than anything. And I'll just, on a side, I grew up very shy. You know, I'd be in the back of the room, don't ask me a question. And several years ago, one of my high school classmates who'd been teaching in Chicago and then retired and came back, she saw my name in the paper or something. She called up and she said, is this the same person I went to school with? It's like, you know, when you get that fire in your belly, you just get okay, and nobody's ever thrown tomatoes or rotten eggs at me, so that's been good too. So yeah, that support, that education, the advocacy. Judy did say that the person who was going to talk about suicide wasn't able to make it. So I've got a few brochures here that talk about suicide, but, you know, they have found, like doing the psychological autopsies following a suicide, that I'm going to say like 90% of people who die by suicide, you know, have some kind of mental health problem. You know, some of it's impulsive, you know, some of it's, you know, my girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever broke up with me, or, you know, I lost my job and I'm terribly embarrassed. But a lot of it has to do with untreated or poorly treated mental illness. You know, as far as we are into our century, work on the brain still lags far behind many other mental illness or medical illnesses. So they're finding more treatments. They're finding out that there are things besides pills that will help your brain. And so, you know, I encourage you to contact your our 3 members of Congress to fund the National Institute of Mental Health. They're the ones who make these brochures, you know, because they are the research arm into the brain. They are the ones who are going to help find out what's going on. I am also on the Suicide Prevention Task Force locally, and it was around 200 South Dakotans died by suicide last year. You know, And it's not all the reservation. That's another myth out there. Unfortunately, men die by suicide more frequently than women. Women attempt suicide more often, but men die because they usually use more lethal means. They're going to be the ones who will maybe hang themselves or use a gun. Women often will take pills, or do something that they will be found and, can be saved. But suicide is a growing problem, and I think that the more we talk about mental health, the more people will seek treatment, and hopefully then the number of people who die by suicide will go down. Unfortunately, we don't always know, do all our prevention efforts work? 200 people still lost their lives. We have no idea how many were saved because of some of the suicide prevention efforts that go on. Did you say the Helpline Center was here?
Well,
That's who was going to. Okay, I don't know if you've heard about the 988 Lifeline. They would have brought you lots of cards and refrigerator magnets that people can take home. The myth about the 988, I would say they're trying to squash, is it's not just if I'm suicidal I should call. If you're feeling any kind of mental distress, call 988. They are answered by, the government was pretty strict about who could answer it. They have to be very highly trained professionals who answer the 988 call. But, don't wait until you feel like you're at the end of your rope. 24/7, 365 call. And the Helpline Center is the statewide group that answers the 988. But if you call and the Sioux Falls people are busy, you will be rolled over to, could be Iowa or Texas or whatever, so that you don't have to wait. If you call 211, you can kind of get to the 988 people also, but you may be put on hold if they're all busy. But if you call 988, you won't be waiting on hold. You might not get Sioux Falls, but you will get to talk to someone. So please, if your church bulletin or whatever, encourage people to, call 988. Any questions about suicide that I can answer? Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask kind of a personal question. You mentioned that you grew up with a mother who had a mental disorder, and as a child, that made it extremely difficult for you. And then you said something to her that she disagreed with, and your relationship then just was dissolved for 10 years. Well, speaking for myself, I should say, have lived with someone who has a mental disorder, but we weren't aware of it, just as you weren't aware of what was wrong with your mother. But what did you do? What did you find out that helped you in healing that relationship with your mother?
What I found out working at Fifth Street and going to their staff development education things, and listening to the conversations of case managers who had people on their caseloads who had personality disorders, you learned to understand, again, she didn't ask for this. And okay, how it happened that we got back into good graces is our son was career Navy, and he was going to be transferred over to Guam, and it was early ages of the internet, but we had email, and I had seen some group emails that had her email address on it. And I had 2 young grandchildren, 5 years old or 5, 6 years old, and I thought, they need to know they have a great grandma, and maybe she needs to meet them. So I just sent her an email, and I said that, Greg's going to be going over to Guam. Would you like to meet Stephen and Lauren? So we met, I think, at the Western Mall. It doesn't, but anyway, that just tickled her pink that I did that. And then she just loved me after that, and I ended up being her computer person and what all. But But had my son not be going to Guam, I don't know when we would have ever talked again.
So how did you work with that relationship? Were you very careful about what you said
Yes,
to her?
I was very careful
What-
about, I kept my opinions to myself because family's important to me. And, sometimes standing your line and blah, blah, blah isn't always what's best for relationships. So, yeah, I just learned to meet her where she was at. And by that time, she was getting older and she was a bit more mellow also, but because it was like from the age of like 40 to 50. So she was, 60 to 70 at that time. So she had mellowed a lot herself also. But yeah, but mostly I just, met her where she was at and I didn't rock the boat because it wasn't worth it.
I was just wondering if, I've often heard it said that if you feel like you have to walk on eggshells, there's something not quite right.
Yes.
If you never know exactly and you're formulating how you're going to say something because you don't want it to be perceived wrong, and yet even then it sometimes is wrong and it
Yeah.
creates a rift. And
Yeah.
I don't know, there almost needs to be some, if you experience this or whatever with yourself or others, but it's a hard thing.
It's a hard thing, and what I recognized at Fifth Street is that people with particularly there's a myriad of personality disorders, but they're right and you're wrong, and unless they want to recognize that they have an issue, it's not going to get addressed. So it's you that have to change the way you interact, because it's not always going to, they're not always going to do that. But yeah, there are a lot of great books. I Hate You, Don't Leave Me is one of the good ones about personality disorders. They're tough. And I say it's all on a spectrum. After I left Fifth, we lived in Canastota, and my old job came open back at the nursing home, and so I went back there, and our consultant pharmacist was one of these people like nails on a chalkboard or whatever. I remember him being in my office, and I said one time something about, we all have a personality disorder, just some are more bothersome than others. He got really torqued at that because I think I hit a nail, but it was one of those times I would have probably been better to keep my mouth shut, but I have an impulse control problem sometimes. But yeah, we all have our personality issues. It's when they start interfering with your world and your life that, they become a problem, but, on a spectrum, so. Other questions about suicide before I talk a bit more about our advocacy? Well, Jerry talked a bit too about the good news is, yes, South Dakota passed Medicaid expansion, which is going to help people who, I think it's 133% of the federal poverty level would qualify for Medicaid, which, many small business owners can't afford group insurance policies for their employees. So, it may help them get insurance. So, it's not just, Johnny sitting home in his parents' basement smoking weed and no, it's gonna help a lot of people. The one thing I'm cautiously optimistic about is people, on disability already who make just too much to qualify for Medicaid currently, but hopefully, because Medicaid really covers a lot more medical expenses than Medicare does. And yes, in that 2-year window from the time, and I don't know why the world government did that, but when you get approved for Social Security disability and you make too much for Medicaid, you go 2 years before you get Medicare. So you've been deemed unable to work, but you don't get insurance for 2 years. So how are you supposed to go to the doctor, go to a therapist and get medications for 2 years? So Medicaid expansion should fill that gap, as long as our legislators don't mess it all up. And, Mark Mickelson, you know, his dad must be rolling over in his grave, is apparently planning to challenge the passage of this because he thinks it didn't pass the one subject rule or whatever. I hope someone talks him out of that, but that's the word on the street, is he's planning to file a lawsuit to, you know, challenge the implementation of it. But, you know, we'll keep our fingers crossed that, you know, people will actually get health insurance here. Just as a tidbit or whatever, there are 40,000 people in the Sioux Falls city who would have a diagnosable mental illness in a given year. Now, that's not counting Brandon and Hartford and et cetera. That's the Sioux Falls City 40,000 people. You know, that means we all know someone. If it's not us, it's a family, a coworker, a vendor, a customer. Everyone knows someone who's got a mental illness. And of that population, there are over 2,000, probably 2,500 people who live with serious mental illness. That's the diagnoses where people, you know, are not able to have a full-time job. Their illness is, you know, so profound that, you know, they need help to live. And that's the group I'm most passionate about, is those with the serious mental illnesses. Some things that we have done advocacy-wise that, you know, you may not know of is crisis intervention team training. It's a 40-hour class for law enforcement or first responders that goes on twice a year. I think it started in 2011. About 50% of the Sioux Falls Police Department are trained in that because you have your retirements, et cetera. But it also, we bring in firefighters, 911 operators, like emergency department people from the pen, et cetera, but learning on how to interact with someone who's having a mental health or substance use crisis. The first couple days we have, you know, psychiatrists and pharmacists and the helpline and different agencies come in and educate the officers about, you know, either the illness or how it's treated, et cetera. Then, also on Tuesday afternoon, they learn like how to talk to someone, how to, you know, de-escalate a situation. And the main thing we use is called Listen, Empathize, Agree, and Partner. It's a program started by Dr. Javier Amador out of New York, whose brother lived with schizophrenia. And Javier is a psychologist, and he's like, you know, Henry would go in the hospital, they'd get him stabilized, he'd come home. A couple days later, I'd find his pills in the garbage can. Well, Henry had a condition called anosognosia. That is a diagnosis where someone does not know they have an illness. Actually, it was discovered in people who have a stroke, like a century or more ago, where, you know, they didn't, and my grandmother actually had that. She had a stroke and her left arm didn't work, and she just called it Molly. And Grandma knew that if she wanted to go out and make a pie, she could do it. But, you know, Molly wasn't helping her out right now. She did not recognize that she'd had a stroke. So that's anosognosia. And so part of Dr. Amador's training is, you know, do you have diabetes, Judy? No. Okay, but if I came up and started trying to say, you have to take insulin because you have diabetes, and you're like, I don't have diabetes, I'm not taking insulin, it'll kill me or whatever. It's the same way if someone has like schizophrenia or something, and they absolutely don't believe they have it. Why would I take this medicine that makes me feel horrible if I don't have that? But what it does is it helps you learn to work with them and say, okay, but Henry, you're tired of being in jail or going to the hospital or whatever. And, you know, get him around to Henry and say, well, you know, I guess when I take those pills, at least I'm staying in my own apartment. So Henry, it took 8 years, but Henry started taking his pills and he was having a very good life. And Henry was a very loving person, and, you know, saw some person having struggles getting their luggage or groceries off of a bus, And so he was helping, and somebody had like a medical emergency, jumped the curb, hit Henry and killed him. You know, but he'd had a few years, he had a girlfriend and everything, but he still never believed he had schizophrenia. But he just knew that if he took these things, at least he got to do what he wanted to do. And so it's called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help. But it teaches, so we help the officers learn this communication thing too. So when you're talking to them, you learn to, you know, say back, so the upstairs neighbors are sending you messages through the sewer pipe telling you to do this. Is that what I'm hearing? Oh my gosh, someone actually is listening to me. They're not telling me I'm crazy. You know, you get them to know that you hear what they're saying and that you're going to try and help them solve this problem. And I will say the officers, you know, after the first couple, we have officers that come up and like give testimonies to the classmates about how much this training has done, you know, to help them out on the street, because, you know, they are the first people. Someone who's in a mental health crisis, the first places they usually reach out to are encounters will be law enforcement or church. I'm real big into people listen to their faith communities, and when our faith communities talk about mental illness and mental health, the way they talk about, you know, cancer or arthritis or whatever, we'll see that stigma go away. You know, if you have a prayer line and if somebody's, you know, been diagnosed with cancer, does everybody go give potlucks and deliver this? But if they go to behavioral health, what happens? Do they get a card? Do they, you know, because nobody knows what to do. But so the more conversations we can have, the more we treat it like any other medical illness, the better. So anyway, so that's Monday and Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, the officers visit different agencies around town. You know, they go to the 5th Street, they go to the VA, they go to Lifescape, they go around and find out the inner workings of the organizations and, you know, what they do. So again, when they encounter someone, they can say, you know what? I went to this place and I think they could really help you out. Then on Thursday, they get to practice what they've been learning. We have actors come in and portray someone having a mental health crisis, and then the officers are evaluated on how they respond to that crisis going on. If they're not participating in that, they're wearing an MP3 player where they're hearing voices. And then they have to do some cognitive tests. And it's like, oh my gosh, you know, you have to write like the Pledge of Allegiance or something while you're hearing these voices, and it's stuff that you should know like that, but how difficult it is. So again, when you encounter someone who's possibly has racing thoughts or hearing voices, they might only hear every 5th word you said. So keep it short, speak calmly, and say the same thing more than once so that they can understand. And, you know, some of them have said, oh my word, I have such admiration for anyone who can live with that day in and day out. You know, 20 minutes did me in. And so it's experiential for them. Then on Friday, they have more presentations from the community and from professionals, et cetera. But at the end of that 40 hours, they have gained a real good understanding of mental illness. And then there's a separate couple-day training for school resource officers, helping them really, you know, understand adolescents who have mental health problems so that they're not just the big guy in charge at school. In collaboration with this 40-hour training, we have a mobile crisis team that law enforcement, if they're called to a mental health situation, they assess it to make sure there aren't weapons or whatever, and then they can call the mobile crisis team to come in and they can spend more time with them, helping them sort out, you know, what's really going on here, you know, do you need to go to Avera Behavioral Health, or could we just, you know, sort it out and, you know, set you up with some appointments, etc. And I believe they found that they have not very many repeat customers for the mobile crisis because they get them set up, they get them, you know, and then there is some follow through somebody calls them and keeps in touch to say, did you keep your appointments, etc. So those two have really been successful in our community. Then we have the Link. And the Link doesn't see very many mental health calls. And I said, I'm thinking it's because the law enforcement and the mobile crisis team head them off at the pass, so that it's not necessary. So, the Link, doesn't see that very many. I talked a little bit about Moms Demand Action and the gun thing, and they will be coming forth with some legislation this year on extreme risk protection laws, or people call them red flag laws, where, if I'm feeling suicidal or homicidal and I have a gun, my family could petition law enforcement to come and temporarily remove the gun from my possession and store it. Then when things are calm, I can petition to get it back again. But it's been shown around the country that these laws save lives, especially because guns are a lethal method of dying by suicide. And that's another thing. We always used to say committed suicide, but you commit a crime. You die by suicide, or it's death by suicide, or you died by a gun or something, but we commit crimes, we don't commit suicide. So it takes all of us, because we grew up saying that word, to do that. So that bill has been introduced, I think, like 4 or 5 years in a row, and it usually doesn't go anywhere. I remember years ago, and I don't know the exact, had something to do with people with if you had been involuntarily committed to the Human Services Center, then you were one of these people flagged that you couldn't have a gun. And I went and testified and said, so John Doe out in Buffalo, South Dakota, has had 3 years of drought, stress on the family. Now his wife is leaving him. He's decided he can't take it anymore, so he's going to, take his own life, and he gets involuntarily committed to the Human Services Center. So are you saying, now that he's on medicine and life, he's back, that he can never go hunt deer or elk again? And then I also said something about, a college student who might, end up getting involuntarily committed. And you mean Jane can't go hunt with her grandpa anymore? Well, it didn't pass that year. Well, the next year, all the gun shoppy people or whatever came in, and it passed. But it was like, think about it. Let's be real. Treatment works, and just because someone has been involuntarily committed does not mean they're not going to be a safe gun owner. Let's look at other things. And then they're also going to introduce a law, something to do with, kind of demanding safe storage. That I haven't read it, so I've just seen some others that, if you've left your gun in an unlocked car and it gets stolen, you're going to be in trouble. You need to keep your gun stored securely so that people can't get their hands on it. Okay, I'm about done. Anyway, the homeless, I don't know if any of you followed on the news, they've been talking about homelessness in Sioux Falls, and this task force has come up with recommendations for how to deal with homelessness. I think, they're not like trying to get rid of homelessness, but I said, has anybody in power gone down and interviewed like all the people at Bishop Dudley, everyone at Union Gospel, to find out what brought them to this point in life? They can sit in their glass offices and decide and think they know what brought them there. But until you interview them, how do you really know what problem you're addressing? That's not gotten me very far. But they're pouring all this money into street outreach teams, et cetera. That's all well and good. But if we don't have services to send people to, what's going to happen? We need more mental health professionals in Sioux Falls. try and get an appointment with a psychiatrist or a therapist. You're going to wait months and months. Well, so what do people do in the meantime? My last thorn in my side is Sioux Area Metro. They are trying to go to SAM on demand, which means you have to call and ask for a bus. They're going to have a few fixed routes, but for many people, okay, so what happens if you don't have a cell phone, or your cell phone doesn't have data, or you cannot figure out how to do this? Many people who rely on public transportation lack the cognitive skills to navigate all this. I hear those complaints down at Fifth Street, because my husband and I go down there on Tuesday mornings because I love that group so much, and so we go and have fun there. But I hear lots of complaints that they're trying to get rid of public transportation. I'm not sure. They had public meetings, and many of them felt empowered enough to go and speak their piece to the city, which, I'm very proud of them for doing that. Not sure if it changed any minds, but okay, I think we've got, about 2 minutes?
You started a little late, so
Okay, so I'll take time for questions then. I babbled on.
You were going to talk a little bit about the veterans housing, I thought, the small...
Yes, that's a private group that's building these tiny homes for veterans down by Axtell Park in that area. I would love to see the city do something similar, maybe right there by Bishop Dudley, because the main component of that is they have services. They'll have case management, making sure that they can live successfully in their own place. I don't know that I could live in something like 300 square feet, but I guess if you've lived in a cot with 70 other people, that would be pretty good. But I like that concept because it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be welcoming. They're going to have like a community room also, but it's going to, it's going to look like a community. It's not going to look like, it's some inner city housing project or whatever. I like the concept mostly because it includes, and that's, yes, I hear over and over again at our family support things is the need for supported housing. One of our family's loved one is in another community in South Dakota because Sioux Falls does not have a transition house for people with serious mental illness. When I worked at Fifth Street, it was the Big Blue House by Mall Landers. That got moved down to Missouri, but that was a transition facility where people could come for 6 to 18 months. Some lived there a little longer than that, but learned again, how do you buy groceries? How do you keep your room clean? How do you, make a menu? How do you do these things? And so that you can stay successful in your own apartment. When the Blue House left, the transition living left too, and we need that. And then we need, another step beyond that is like, people in an apartment. The Labrie Apartments on 6th and Phillips, there was actually, one of the apartments was staffed by Southeastern 24/7. So if people in the apartment building were having some issues, they had somebody they could talk to 24/7. So they didn't get evicted. We've got to find ways to keep people living in the community.
Phyllis has a lot of things that she brought, and she said our church could keep them. Men in depression, obsessive compulsive disorder. I think I have a little of that. Schizophrenia, chronic illness and mental health, post-traumatic stress disorder, which Jerry talked about, and how devastating that can be, 20 years to try and climb out of that hole. Bipolar disorder, perinatal depression, did I mention that? Chronic illness and mental health, borderline personality disorder, attention deficit hyperactive, children and teens, and about suicide and eating disorders. There's a plethora of information here. If you know of somebody in your family or a neighbor or a relative somewhere out that could use some of these.
Or if you just want to learn more yourself.
Yes, if you yourself want to self-diagnose. Anyway, I thank you so much for coming. And John, was there anything you wanted to
say, John, we kind of left you out.
No, you guys did great. Thank you.
Okay, and so let's give him a thanks.
And
A lot of
thank you, John.
information in a short amount of time. And then next week, Tom and Heather Anderson are going to be sharing some Christmas music, some backstories, and some personal stories. So be sure and come, bring a friend. It'll be fun. It'll be feel good. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. First Sunday in Advent.
And so consequently, she knows.